Okay, so now we start our investigation of utilitarianism, and we're going to start with what's known as classical utilitarianism, in particular the utilitarianism of this bloke, Jeremy Bentham. Okay, let me just talk a little bit about what the thing on the right is. That's Jeremy Bentham's auto icon, as it's called. What the heck is that? Well, basically, Bentham, when he died, got himself stuffed, and that's him. That's his body stuffed. It's not actually his original head. His original head turned green, and they decided to replace it with a wax, I think. And it's in this box in University College London, and you can go and see it. I mean, the first time I saw it, I knew it was there, but I hadn't thought about it. I just walked into this building and saw it, and I was really, taken aback when I saw it. It's quite something to see. Now you might think, well, why on earth did he do this? And well, he was a strange bloke. I mean, I think that's the first answer, but there's more to it than that, and it tells you a bit about the man and his philosophy that he wanted to do this, because one of the reasons he was very keen on it was he wanted to overcome superstition. He thought superstition was causing a lot of unnecessary misery, and particularly in this case, of course, superstition around death. And he wanted to do this as a way of kind of breaking down some superstitions and making people less miserable. And so he thought that this was something that he could do to make the world a better place. And that's really, I think, the essence of his philosophy. He's trying to make the world a better place. Now, for Bentham, justice is about making people's lives go well. Right? Justice is about making people's lives go well. The central thought in utilitarianism is this. Utilitarianism is that principle which approves or disapproves of every action whatsoever according to the tendency which it appears to have to augment or diminish the happiness of the party whose interest is in question. So note then the focus on happiness. The right action is the one that maximizes happiness. Justice is about maximizing happiness. And note also the phrase, the party whose interest is in question. The party whose interest is in question. Turns out that's actually, in principle, everybody. In fact, Bentham would say not only human beings, but non-human animals as well. I'm not going to go into that much in this course, but anything that can feel pleasure and pain counts. Anything that could be happy or unhappy counts. And the idea, the just thing to do is always to try and maximize the amount of happiness. Now, in theory, at least, this is a very simple theory. And I think you can see immediately it's a very intuitively appealing theory that, justice is about making people's lives go well. The idea is simple. It's simply this. The right thing to do is to maximize everybody's happiness. What does happiness mean, though? Well, happiness for Bentham means pleasure, and unhappiness means pain. This theory is known as hedonism. What matters is happiness. What matters is pleasure over pain. The slogan for that, the jargon for that, is hedonism. Okay, so says Bentham, justice is about maximizing happiness, maximizing the amount of pleasure in the world and minimizing the amount of pain in the world. Okay, so some things to notice about this theory. The first thing to notice is that the theory is impartial. Everyone, it's not quite right, but this will do for now. Everyone counts for the same. What counts is the ability to feel pleasure and pain. The jargon for that is sentience. If you're sentient, if you can feel pleasure and pain, then you count. And you count for as much as everybody else counts. These things don't count. Birth status, wealth, sex, skin color, and so on. Those things don't count. They don't matter. They're morally irrelevant. Now, that might not strike you as a particularly interesting claim. We're used to that today, but that was a very significant claim for Bentham to make in the time that he made it. It was a revolutionary idea for at least two main reasons. The first reason is that many people at the time believed that the distinctions that I just mentioned were morally relevant. The medieval view against which, this is well past the Middle Ages, but there were remnants of this idea that still existed in Bentham's day. The medieval view was that status meant everything, that God put you on earth in a particular place in society, and justice was about staying there, right? Maintaining your place in society. And Bentham is reacting against this and against all the descendants of this view. He's saying, no, none of this matters. Birth status, wealth, none of this matters. The only thing that matters is the ability to feel pleasure and pain. There is, morally speaking, no natural order of things, says Bentham. The second reason Bentham's theory is revolutionary is that it introduced a naturalism into moral philosophy. Naturalism. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you might compare it with Locke. Remember when I talked about Locke and Filmer and his disagreement with Filmer over the divine right of kings and so on? There was a lot of discussion about, remember how Filmer's argument went? Well, God made Adam, and God gave Adam dominion over everything, and the monarchs of Europe have inherited this authority from Adam. And Locke's response is to say, no. People don't have, the people are the property of God, not the property of other people, and so on. This is all there's all the supernatural element in Locke's theory. It's all about what God thought and this is gone in Bentham. With Bentham, the focus is on natural facts, the amount of pleasure and pain that there is in the world. This is a scientific approach to morality. Right? At least in principle, we'll talk about this a bit later. You can measure happiness. You can measure pleasure and pain. And so the right thing to do is not to consult some supernatural source. The right thing to do in any particular instance is to work out what will maximize pleasure over pain, to do some scientific inquiry and find out what it is that will maximize pleasure over pain. Now, this doesn't mean that there's something irreligious about Bentham's view. I mean, Bentham himself may or may not have been, but there are certainly philosophers that we'll study, other utilitarians, who were deeply committed, had a deeply committed religious faith, but they thought nevertheless that the right way of thinking about morality was to conduct some kind of scientific-like inquiry, to actually look in the world and see what a difference certain policies would make. So if you've got a choice between policy A and policy B, what should you do? The utilitarian answer is you work out whether policy A or policy B would make people's lives go better. You figure it out. You do some studies, right? Do some action, get busy and do some work and find out which of these strategies, which of these policies will actually create the most happiness in the world. And that's the right one to do. Bentham was a social reformer. He was angered at the way that traditional ideas about morality, particularly, for example, a lack of concern for the poor, retrenched suffering and prevented progress. Right, so the way he saw it is that traditional morality was keeping things the way they were, and what had to happen was there had to be very significant social reform in the society in which he lived. In particular, Bentham totally rejected the natural law teaching of philosophers like John Locke, which he believed entrenched privilege at the expense of the majority. So the idea was the natural law thinking of Locke was all very good at protecting, for example, the wealthy, protecting the wealth of the wealthy, but it wasn't any good at all at doing something about the poverty and the terrible conditions that the poor lived in, the majority of people lived in. Now, to just give you a handle on the significance of this, during the Industrial Revolution, which is a bit after Locke, but it's more relevant to Marx when we study Marx, but just to give you a handle on the kind of thing that Bentham is talking about, during the Industrial Revolution, it's been estimated that the life expectancy of a member of the working class in London was 37. Okay, so these figures are skewed a lot to some extent by child mortality, but nevertheless, 37 years is how long, if you're a member of the working class, is how long you could expect to live in London. And if you thought that was bad, in Liverpool, it was 26, right? The average life expectancy, 26 years. That's it. Okay, so Bentham really wanted to do something about this, and he thought that, for example, Locke's insistence that property was a natural right was thwarting the ability of the society to respond to very serious difficulties, particularly for the less well-off, who happen to be the vast majority of people. Now remember what Locke's position was. Locke's position was that property, title, labour and so on revealed industriousness, and so therefore people deserved the wealth that they had. So in Locke might say, well, yeah, I mean, you know, there are poor people and they die earlier, but that's because they're not as industrious as the wealthy. And this is the way it should be. That's what justice requires. It requires this inequality. Bentham will just have none of this. And he is absolutely scathing of the idea of natural rights. In a very famous passage, he says this: natural rights is simple nonsense. Natural and imprescriptible rights, rhetorical nonsense, nonsense upon stilts. That this rhetorical nonsense ends in the old strain of mischievous nonsense, for immediately a list of these pretended natural rights is given, and those are so expressed as to present to view legal rights. And of these rights, whatever they are, there is not, it seems, any one which any government can upon any occasion whatsoever abrogate in the smallest particle. So notice that Bentham's view here then is the whole idea of natural rights entrenches privilege in a totally immoral way. And I really think it'd be useful to think about this in the kind of human rights culture that we live today. I think Bentham would have no truck with that either. And it's worth thinking about Bentham's view that this whole discourse entrenches a kind of privilege that he thinks is morally impermissible. Okay, so note the implication here, just going back to Locke. Locke's view prevents necessary reform. It undermines the possibility of argument. Okay, now, this doesn't mean that Bentham was opposed to rights entirely. He just thought that rights were human creations. Right? Rights are things that we create, in particular, governments and laws create. So we should have rights, Bentham thinks, but the rights we should have are not sort of imprescriptible rights that have fallen from heaven. The rights that we should have are the rights that bring about utility. So we should create rights in people that bring about utility. And what does that mean? Make people happy. People should have rights that make them happy. Right? People should have rights that prevent unhappiness. Right? That's what utility is, happiness. Okay, so we should have rights that bring about utility. And the job of the lawmaker, says Bentham, the job of the person who makes the law is to create rights, to create positive legal rights that lead to happiness. That's justice. Justice is the creation of rights that lead to happiness. The rights have not fallen from God, they're a human creation and they have a job to do. The job of rights is to make the world a better place. Rights and law for Bentham are tools for realizing these political goals. They have no value in themselves. They're like money in that regard. Rights are like money. They're just only useful for what they bring. Money buys goods, and rights are supposed to, if they function properly, are supposed to bring happiness. Now, I think you can see already that this is an incredibly intuitively powerful view. Right, the idea that justice is about making people's lives go well, and making people happy, is an incredibly powerful view. It's also an extremely influential view. It has an enormous impact on the law. The question now is, how is it actually supposed to work? How does it work in practice? And that's where we'll start our next episode.